Last week, while the world wasn't watching, Ghana quietly signed an agreement that has a lot of people and human rights activists screaming betrayal. They've agreed to accept deportees from the United States, people who have never stepped foot into Ghana, people America simply doesn't want. But here's what's really scary, because Ghana isn't alone. This is now becoming a norm across Africa. Right now, as I'm talking to you, Rwanda signed up to take 250 deportees. Uganda opened its borders, even though they are already hosting Africa's largest refugee population. Eswatini is holding 5 men in solitary confinement, men from Vietnam, Cuba, Yemen, locked away in a maximum security prison that's already packed beyond capacity. Even South Sudan, a country still recovering from civil war, has accepted 8 deportees from countries as far away as Myanmar and Laos. But one country said no. Honestly, I am surprised that Nigeria said no, because I was expecting Nigeria to be first in the queue to sign up to this deal. But they looked Donald Trump's administration straight in the eye and said no. Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuga declared that Nigeria will not become America's dumping ground. So what's really going on here? Why are so many African governments secretly signing these deals? What leverage is America using over them? And what are they getting in return? The African Union is already sounding the alarm bells, warning that these agreements turn the continent into a dumping ground for arbitrary deportations. Human rights lawyers are documenting violations of international law because deportees are being held without legal counsel. Some in solitary confinement, their basic rights stripped away. This isn't just an immigration policy. This is colonialism in a new form. In today's episode, we are going to expose the hidden terms of this secret agreement. We are revealing the pressure tactics being used and how Ghana became America's West African deportation dumping ground. Let's get into it. Why Ghanaians are distracted by a lot of things, like protesting against Nigerians, their government signed a document that will make international headlines within hours. What they agreed to accept shocked even seasoned diplomats, because on September 11th, that was yesterday, President John Mahama stood before cameras and dropped a bombshell. Ghana had just received 14 West African deportees from the United States. And surprisingly again, most of them are Nigerians and only one Gambian. These weren't criminals being returned home. These are people with no ties to Ghana, shipped there because America didn't want them. Mahama's excuse, the ECOWAS Free Movement Protocol. That was the excuse he's using. He said West Africans, including Nigeria, don't need visa to come to Ghana. That is why he accepted these deportees, trying to make this sound like some generous act of regional brotherhood instead of what it really was, giving in to American pressure. But let me tell you what actually happened. Within hours of their arrival, Ghana provided buses to transport the Nigerian deportees back to Nigeria. The Gambian guy was left to coordinate with his embassy for an air ticket home. Now, Ghana wasn't helping these people. It was just serving as America's temporary dumping ground. The timing wasn't random either, because this announcement came as Ghana faces serious pressure from Washington, higher tariffs on Ghanaian exports, tighter visa restrictions on Ghanaian nationals. Mahama himself admitted relations with the US were tightening. Translation: Ghana bent the knees to avoid economic punishment. On social media, Ghanaian citizens questioned why their government was accepting foreigners, especially Nigerians, when the country already struggles with unemployment and limited resources. Others pointed out the cruel irony. Ghana accepting deportees at the same time anti-Nigerian protests has swept through Ghana. This wasn't just about 14 people being deported to Ghana. This was Ghana officially joining a controversial program that human rights groups call a violation of international law. Ghana became the first West African country to sign on to Trump's third country deportation scheme, a program that sends people to countries they've never seen, countries that they don't even speak their language. But Ghana's decision wasn't made in isolation because across the continent, similar secret deals has been happening for months. And what we discovered about these other deals will shock even you. Now, from the mountains of Rwanda to the kingdom of Eswatini, African leaders have been getting the same phone call. The message was simple. We have people we need you to take, and we won't take no for an answer. The pattern is scary in how organized it is. Rwanda agreed to accept up to 250 deportees, with President Kagame's government promising training, medical care, and housing assistance. 7 have already arrived. Uganda announced a temporary agreement claiming they would only accept deportees of African origin, as if that makes shipping strangers to a country any less cruel. Then there is Eswatini. 5 men from Vietnam, Jamaica, Laos, Yemen, and Cuba are right now locked in solitary confinement at the overcrowded Matsafa prison. The facility is operating at 190% capacity. These men have no lawyers, no connection to Eswatini, and no idea when or if they will ever leave. Even South Sudan, a nation still torn by civil war, where the U.S. State Department warns against travel because of crime, kidnapping, and armed conflict, accepted 8 deportees from Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Cuba, and Mexico. Now let us sink in, because America is dumping migrants in a war zone. America's strategy is brilliant and also evil. Target the most vulnerable. Most of the countries that said yes has the same characteristics. Smaller populations, economies that depend on aid, leaders who don't answer to their own people. Rwanda needs American investment. Uganda hosts about 1.7 million refugees and depends on international support. Eswatini is a tiny kingdom, desperate for foreign money. South Sudan can barely function as a country. Now, the pressure tactics are classic superpower bullying. In July, Trump hosted 5 West African leaders at the White House: Liberia, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Gabon. The official agenda, trade and critical minerals, but the real agenda, deportation deals. One U.S. official confirmed that the deportation program was a significant topic of discussion. Now, this isn't random policy. This is a coordinated campaign to make Africa accept the idea of being America's deportation destination. America have already contacted 58 countries, most of them African countries. The message is clear: cooperate or face economic consequences. But when Trump's team approached Africa's giants, they got an answer that will shake the entire diplomatic world. Certain things happen in this world that surprises you, that genuinely surprises you. Because when this deportation deal came, I was expecting Nigeria, my own country, to be number 1 on the queue to beg for it. But since we live in a world full of surprises, I would say this particular one is a pleasant surprise, because Nigeria's foreign minister, Yusuf Togo, did something nobody expected. He even quoted American rap lyric to reject American foreign policy, and it worked. I got problems of my own. I can do nothing for you, man. In one quote, he captured what every African should feel about America's deportation demands while using America's own culture to deliver the message. Togo's full statement was even more powerful. The US is putting serious pressure on African countries to accept Venezuelans, some straight out of prisons. Nigeria has enough problems of its own. He didn't sugarcoat it. Nigeria will not become America's dumping ground. Now, that's a pleasant surprise. Washington's response was fast and predictable, and it was also furious. What followed was visa restrictions, tariff threats, the usual economic weapons America uses when smaller countries refuse to obey. But Nigeria held firm, again surprisingly. With over 230 million people and one of Africa's largest economy, Nigeria has power smaller countries don't have, especially in Africa. The foreign ministry spokesperson made Nigeria's position crystal clear. Even if other African countries accept them, Nigeria will not accept them. This wasn't diplomatic talk. This was drawing a line in the sand. Now, the difference between Nigeria and Ghana and other African response is striking. While Ghana talk about ECOWAS protocols and regional solidarity, Nigeria focuses on national security and sovereignty. Again, very surprising. Now, while Rwanda promises rehabilitation services, Nigeria questions why African countries should clean up America's immigration mess. Nigeria's defiance exposed how weak some other African governments are. If Nigeria, a country that gets significant American investment and has complex security partnerships with America, can say no, what's the excuse for other countries like Ghana, like Uganda, like Eswatini, and even Rwanda? Now, the diplomatic fallout was immediate. America began looking for ways to get around Nigerian resistance, including sending deportees through countries that cooperate. But the damage was already done. Nigeria had proven that resistance was possible, that Africa can say no to Uncle Sam. Now, the message spread across the continent. If Africa's most populous nation and the most notorious nation too could stand up to superpower pressure, others could follow. Nigeria's defiance sent shockwaves through Washington. But for the Africans who said yes, the real nightmare was just starting. Now, there were legal challenges even in the United States. The Supreme Court ruling that changed everything happened on June 15, 2025. In 6 hours, a migrant could now be deported to a country they've never seen or even understand the destination country language. The conservative majority threw out decades of legal protection with a single unsigned order. Gone was the requirement for 15-day notice. Eliminated was the right to an interview about their fears in their native language. Removed was any guarantee that deportees wouldn't face torture or death in their destination country. The court exposes thousands to the risk of torture or death in far-off places more dangerous than the countries they fled. The case of Kilmer Abrego Garcia shows how cruel this system really is, because this man from El Salvador was facing deportation to Uganda, a country he has never visited, where he knows nobody, whose language he doesn't even understand. His only crime was living in America without proper papers. His punishment, exile to a continent he has never seen. Under the new rules, immigration officers can deport migrants in as little as 6 hours. The only requirement, notice in a language they understand, a deliberately vague rule that allows deportations even when translators aren't available. Now, the human cost is massive. In Eswatini's Matsafa prison, 5 men currently sit in solitary confinement. US officials describe them as having committed serious crimes, including murder and sexual assault. But legal advocates question these descriptions. Some deportees have no criminal records. Others served their sentences years ago. The detention conditions are horrible. Matsafa operates at 190% capacity. Deportees are held without lawyers, without contact with their families, without any timeline for release. One legal advocate called it human trafficking disguised as deportation. The system operates in complete secrecy. Agreement terms stay classified. Financial arrangements are hidden. Even the criteria for choosing destination countries is unclear. What is clear, however, is that America has created a deportation assembly line that strips away human rights with industrial efficiency. 6 hours from arrest to exile, no appeals, no protection, and no mercy. But the legal challenges were just the beginning, because across Africa, something unprecedented was happening. The people were fighting back. In Uganda, former opposition leader Mathias Mpuga didn't hold back. The whole scheme stinks. His words captured what millions across Africa were already feeling: betrayal, anger, and shame that their own government has sold their dignity for American dollars. In Eswatini, the resistance took legal form. The Eswatini Litigation Center, backed by the Southern African Litigation Center and local women's group, filed an urgent court case. Their argument was simple. The secret deportation deal violated the Constitution, which requires Parliament to approve international agreements. The case was supposed to be held back in August. Then it got postponed to September 25th, then delayed again. Each postponement showed how desperately the government wanted to avoid public scrutiny of the deal's terms. The African Union finally broke its silence on August 31st. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights issued a stern warning. These deportation deals risk turning Africa into a dumping ground for arbitrary deportations. They called the policies part of a system of passing migration responsibilities that violates fundamental human rights. But the most powerful resistance came from ordinary citizens. In Ghana, social media users pointed out the cruel irony. Accepting foreign deportees while anti-Nigerian protests has recently swept through Accra. In Uganda, citizens asked why their government was taking in more people when they already host 1.7 million refugees. In Rwanda, questions emerged about why President Kagame was helping Trump while criticizing Western interference in African affairs. The Continental conversation had begun. From Lagos to Kampala to Kigali, Africans were asking the same question. Why are our governments helping America solve its problems while ignoring their own problems? The public outrage was deafening, but behind closed doors, a different conversation was happening, one involving millions of dollars and global power games. Now, you may think these deals are free of charge or African government just giving in to Uncle Sam, but it comes with a wire transfer. $100,000 for one refugee, $5 million for a dozen Venezuelans. Suddenly, the math of human dignity became crystal clear. The financial incentives are hidden but real. El Salvador got between $5 to $6 million for housing Venezuelan deportees in a maximum security prison. Rwanda allegedly, I repeat, allegedly received about $100,000 for accepting an Iraqi refugee. These aren't humanitarian programs. They are business deals. But the real currency isn't cash, it's global power. The Trump administration has turned America's economic dominance into a weapon to force compliance. Visa restrictions hit first. Uganda faced threats of fewer visas for its nationals. Ghana saw tighter restrictions on Ghanaian travels to the US. Then came the tariffs. Ghana has already felt the squeeze. Higher tariffs on Ghanaian exports, making their product less competitive in American market. President Mahama admitted relations were tightening. Diplomatic code for economic pressure. The bigger game is China versus America for an African influence. Countries that accept deportees signal they are choosing Washington over Beijing. Rwanda's agreement comes as Kagame seeks American investment to counter Chinese influence. Uganda's deal coincides with talks about better US-Uganda trade relations. The pattern is clear. Smaller aid-dependent countries are most vulnerable. Authoritarian governments are most willing. Countries with poor human rights records are preferred partners. They ask fewer questions about how deportees are treated and faces less resistance at home. But the hidden costs are enormous. Uganda already hosts about 1.7 million refugees, straining resources and creating social tensions. Adding deportees from unrelated countries risk destabilizing communities already under pressure. Eswatini's prison system, operating at 190% capacity, can't handle more detainees without making conditions worse for everyone. The social costs go beyond immediate deportee welfare. Ghana's acceptance of Nigerian deportees came just as anti-Nigerian protests swept through Accra. The timing suggests governments care more about American approval than domestic peace. The cynical calculation is obvious. Short-term money and diplomatic favor versus long-term sovereignty and dignity. Most governments are choosing the money, but as African governments counted their payment, they hadn't considered the one force that will ultimately determine their fate, their own people's dignity. 3 months after the first deportation flight landed in Africa, the consequences are reshaping an entire continent's relationship with the world's most powerful nation, because the legal challenges are now gaining steam. Eswatini's court case has inspired similar challenges across the continent. Human rights lawyers are building a coordinated response, arguing that these deportation deals violate international law, constitutional requirements, and basic human dignity. The deportees themselves remain stuck in limbo. In Rwanda, 7 migrants get training and medical care, but have no timeline for independence or resettlement. In Eswatini, 5 men sit in solitary confinement with no legal representation and no release date. In South Sudan, 8 deportees navigate a war zone where even American diplomats are afraid to go. Continental solidarity is slowly emerging. Nigeria's resistance has encouraged other nations to question American pressure. The African Union's condemnation provides institutional backing for resistance. Civil society organizations are working together across borders to document abuses and challenge deportation deals in court. But the damage is already done. America has successfully normalized the idea of Africa as a dumping ground. 58 countries have already been contacted, most of them African countries. More deals are being negotiated. The precedent is already set. The long-term implications are staggering. These deportation policies represent a fundamental shift in US-Africa relations from partnership and back to exploitation again. Years of diplomatic progress in fighting terrorism, human trafficking, and building trade cooperation are being destroyed by policies that treat Africa as America's problem-solving destination. The choice facing every African nation is stark: sovereignty or survival, economic pressure versus national dignity, short-term benefit versus long-term independence. Again, surprisingly, Nigeria has shown resistance is possible. The African Union has provided institutional support. Civil society has shown coordination across borders. The tools for continental resistance exist. What's missing is the political will. However, this is just the beginning, because as more deportation flights prepare to take off, every African leader must answer one question: what is your people's dignity worth? And across the continent, the answer is becoming clear: it's not for sale. Now, if you have watched to this point, this is Frontline Africa. This is where we talk about geopolitics from Africa's perspective. We talk about the stories that the mainstream media will not dare talk about in detail like we are doing right here. Tell us how you feel about this deportation of all the scums of the earth into our continent. Africa already have problems of their own. Africa hosts the highest number of poor people on the planet. Our leaders should focus on solving our own problems instead of solving America's own problem, because America will always solve their own problem first. As a matter of fact, Trump's administration policy is America first. Why can't African leaders say Africa first? So if you want to see more of my comments, maybe consider to subscribe and turn up those notifications. I am your host, Ezekiel Enejeta, and I will see you in the next one. It's a bye-bye for now.